Like to start on time. We appreciate all of you who have logged in. There's still some folks joining, but thanks for all of you that got logged in and are here on time with us. So good Wednesday evening. Thanks for joining us. Tonight's program is Highway Traffic Incident Management. We're doing a non-COVID program tonight. We figured everybody's had probably enough COVID information and training for a while. If you haven't, however, feel free to join us tomorrow night at 7:30. Tomorrow's night program will be at 7:30. We're doing an update on COVID-19 and what first responders should know. So feel free to sign up for that one. Next Monday night, we've got another program planned. We're going to do emergency response next Monday night, and next Wednesday night, we're doing intro to agricultural emergencies. So again, two more non-COVID topics next week. We do have the COVID-19 first responder update tomorrow night at 7:30. If you want to sign up for any of those, you can go to ESIP.com. We do have a new webpage up as of yesterday. So if you go to ESIP.com or McNeilandCompany.com, scroll down on the left side, you'll see a link there, which will give you a link where you can register for all of the webinars that we have upcoming and see the list as that unfolds. It will be that's the best place to go, is at ESIP.com. Scroll down on the left side and see them all right there. We've had a number of requests and questions already tonight on the programs that we've already done. Yes, they all have been recorded. Tonight's is being recorded as well. If you're on our e-learning system, you can go take them right through the e-learning system. You can get a certificate for taking any of the courses that way by taking it off from e-learning. Once it gets up on there, usually takes us about 24 to 48 hours, depends on how busy our IT folks are trying to keep everybody working remotely from home. But we're getting those put up on the system just as quickly as we can. There will also be links available through the esip.com website. So you can go right to the website, click on that webinars link, and you'll be able to get on any of the programs that we've already done as soon as they're uploaded. I believe there's one or two up there right now. We've got another 5 we're hoping to get up sometime tomorrow. So the programs are available. Again, thanks for joining us. We realize everybody's looking for training. We realize everybody's bottled up inside and they're looking for something different to do. And that's why we're going to offer tonight's program, non-COVID related, and the 2 next week, just to give you something else to talk about besides COVID for a change. So tonight, I'm glad to be joined by 2 of my colleagues who are going to present the program for us. I call them good cop, bad cop. You can try to figure out which is which when we get through the program. But 2 gentlemen who know quite a lot about this subject, and it's an important subject. Traffic incident management, if you look at those line of duty deaths every year, we're killing way too many firefighters, police officers, ambulance workers, tow truck operators, you name it. Too many people are getting killed up on the highway. So we're going to look at some things that we can do to better prepare for those events, and some things that we can do to try to stay safer while we're up there on the highway. So again, thanks for joining us. We can't thank you guys enough for the support that you've shown us with what we're trying to get up. I can tell you my staff is working 24/7 to produce this material and get it up on the website for you. So if you're talking to them, make sure you give them some praise and a hats off, because they're doing a great job. So with that, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lee Price. Go ahead, sir.
Great. Thanks very much, Dave. As Dave mentioned, tonight we're going to talk about a topic that isn't related to the current healthcare crisis across America, but it's becoming every day more and more a greater, more serious problem. It's down to at least 1 responder a day is killed in a struck by incident when they're operating on the scene of a crash, by maybe a secondary or even a tertiary crash that occurs. And so our goal tonight is to give you some strategies and ideas on how to do the best thing we can to ensure the safety while we're up there working on those highways. We're going to focus, a lot of this is focused on those multi-lane freeways and highways, but we're also going to pepper in some information if you're just working on something, say, like a regular small 2-lane state highway, and ways we can approach it to stay safe. Well, Charlie and I are gonna go with that. First, real quick, Dave already covered all this, stole my thunder, so it's just going to be fast. We are recording it tonight. It will be up on e-learning in about 24 or 48 hours. If you have questions, You can either enter them in the Q&A box. If you mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll see it pop up. There's a Q&A box. There's also a chat box. You can use either one. We keep an eye on both of them and do our very best to answer your questions. We'll be providing certificates for people who participate tonight, and you can make your request for one at certificates@mcneillandcompany.com. And if there's any other questions afterwards, something occurs to you, or some other challenges or things that you're just looking for a source of information, our department is full of people who are a wealth of information, or we know who to talk to ask the question to get you the best answer that we can. So you can either send us an email at riskmanagement@mcneillandcompany.com or call us 800-822-3747. And that's extension 176. We have to put up a little bit of a disclaimer just because we know that not everybody's perfect and not everybody knows everything. It's important that all of us, as we approach this particular topic, every car crash is a multi-agency discipline response. And that means that we have to work as a team with all of those agencies and all the people who are coming up there to keep everybody safe. And in order to do that, start today if you are not already collaborating with those other stakeholders and figure out the plans and know what the resources are available and who's going to do what when you get up there. Pay close attention to those local, regional, and state protocols and procedures as well. I know larger metropolitan areas that have lots of traffic, they have additional resources and actually have some pretty clear plans. Those of us out here in rural land, it's a little bit more of an ad hoc approach, but we can still have plans and protocols in place and how we deal with this. What we're going to be giving you tonight is best practice. We're looking at national standards, guidelines, and sources of information to see what is working for most people. What that means is we don't have all the answers, so stay informed, continue to do your own research, and that way we are doing everything we can to keep all of our responders safe. My name's Lee Price, risk management training specialist here at McNeil & Company. I'm a 30-year veteran of fire and EMS, retired recently from the City of Cortland Fire Department as a fire captain. I also am the director of the EMS training program at Tompkins Cortland Community College and still proudly serve in the United States Navy as a senior chief hospital corpsman. We're joined by Charlie Brundza. And Charlie, I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself and kind of kick us off from there.
Sure, sounds great. Thanks, Lee. Again, my name's Charlie Brundza. I'm a risk management safety specialist here at McNeil & Company. I'm the law enforcement background. I worked for the Tioga County Sheriff's Office, Connecticut State Police. I was the Berkshire Town Justice up here for 15 years. And I'm also a bait fish instructor for New York State DOT, and that stands for Bus Accident Investigation Training for Identifying Safety Hazards. So it's a little challenge. I bring diverse background into the area here, and we'll get to the first slide. Lee, you got that? All right. So we're going to be talking about traffic incident management. Why are we talking about that? Well, on-scene vehicle incidents are more prevalent than ever. From 2005 to 2014, we had 599 police officers killed in auto accidents, including 97 that were struck by vehicles. 2017, 10 firefighters died after being struck by vehicles. That's 16% of the total on-duty deaths for that year, and that's from the NFPA. 25% of the traffic congestion caused motor vehicle collisions, and 9% of all motor vehicle collisions are secondary incidents in congestion. In November 6, 2009, there was a motor vehicle accident in Baldwin, Alabama. While they were there, the fire department was there, a secondary accident happened where the fire chief, Dwayne Bradshaw, 41 years old, was killed. A logging truck collided with two other vehicles at the scene of the accident. So we need to be careful at all times. We need to watch our backs when we're out there. We can't rely that a vehicle is going to slow down or pay attention. A little thing that happened to me one time when I was in Connecticut. I was at an accident. I got out, and one of the things I was taught was to leave my driver's door open when I got out of the vehicle. As I'm up at the scene there talking to the person, I'm walking back, I see a vehicle coming. Of course, first snowfall of the year, about 1 a.m, and little bend in the road. Well, that car came, took my car door out, caused me to jump over the guardrail, and the other person struck that vehicle that had hit the guardrail. When I approached that driver, his comment was, I had 4-wheel drive. Well, that's great for driving, but it's not good for stopping. So we need to be alert at all times when we're out there. It can happen anytime. You need to have your head on a swivel, be looking around, be paying attention to everything around you. So please always pay attention and don't rely that people will slow down or pay attention. Yes, we have the move over laws now, but you need to be alert. You need to be ready for the worst and always watching. The information we're going to give you comes from a variety of places. We're going to be using the US DOT National Traffic Incident Training Program, Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices, NFPA standards, US DOT Federal Highway, and the Emergency Responder Safety Institute. The one thing I want to throw out about the Emergency Responder Safety Institute is that they do have the online courses, and I suggest, and I highly recommend that you take these training programs when you can in your time. I know we don't all have a lot of spare time, but these are very important programs. They are certificates, and they do help you to understand different things, to look for objects in the road, power lines, and basically teach you to start looking for objects and everything around for your own safety. So, traffic incident management, what are we doing? We're getting there for crash motor vehicles, hazards. We're looking for motorists attempting to proceed on their way. And how are most of these accidents happening? Well, a lot of these are distracted driving. The 5 Ds, distractive, drowsy, drunk, drugged, and just plain old dumb. We've all seen that out there. Cell phone is becoming one of the biggest problems in the country. One of the things I did is I did a little research, and 1.6 million accidents happen every year, according to the National Safety Council. And they're cell phone related. That's just cell phone related accidents. Out of those, 390,000 are people texting. So basically 1 in 4 accidents is someone on their cell phone. We've become so connected, and people have a difficult time putting those things away. I've seen people watching videos. I've seen people doing everything with them. You need to be ready for it. 1 in 4 accidents occurs. Another one that happens is the drugged. It's tough. Drug driving's tough to find, tough to know, but 44% of the drivers in fatal accidents have tested positive for drugs. Alcohol is another big issue. So please always be careful. 2017, 21.4 million people aged 16 or older drove under the influence of alcohol. 12.8 million under the influence of illicit drugs. Drugs are hard to identify. I've made numerous DUI arrests, and they are out there. So please pay attention. I always tell people, do not drink and drive. It's not worth it. Okay, so when we get on the road here, I'm sorry about this. So we get to an accident. Why not just close the road? Well, sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. It's unavoidable, but the traffic needs to go somewhere. So if you're on the highway, where are you going to put those people? You send them off an exit, we may not have somewhere for them to go that's anywhere close or easy to get to. They may not be a related area where they can get back on the highway shortly after. Also, you start sending people on back roads, they get lost, we're going to have distracted driving and possibly more accidents on the back roads. So we need to always try to figure, are there areas where we can bypass the routes? Will it cause congestion elsewhere? And can we safely manage the problem and allow traffic to pass?
Yeah, Charlie, thanks. The jump ahead was me trying my push to talk function I just wanted to chime in a little bit on your comments with the cell phone, if I may, to jump back. Is one of the things that I think is really scary for us while we're operating up on that roadway is when somebody is using that cell phone, especially to text, but any other reason to dial or whatever, where that is a time when they are not looking at the road, they're looking at their device. And when they're not looking at when they're not looking at the road, they aren't looking far down the road, even if they, it's just a complete distraction. Cognitively, we know the studies are just rolling in now, proving that the person operating or messing with that cell phone is essentially driving just like somebody who is intoxicated or impaired. So you raise a really good point, and the statistics are kind of showing that and proving that out.
And I think one of the things that we see, Lee, too, is the people on these cell phones now, they're going on to Facebook and doing these live actions of the accidents causing more accidents. So put these cell phones away. I mean, it's, if you're a passenger, that's one thing, but as the driver, you need to focus, especially in accident scenes. I don't know how many times I've been in an accident, I've had walked away with 2 or 3 other accidents afterwards, and we all see those mass pileups. A lot of them could be avoided if people would just pay attention to what the vehicle in front of them is doing and not looking at the accident scene and not looking at the responders.
Agreed.
So some considerations that we have to have is the time of day. Is it a Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock? The people are going to be in a rush to get out of there. And that's one of the biggest accident times I ever used to see. And when I worked as a trooper there was the evenings, right at the rush hour. Usually, the other things, the big factors, like I mentioned earlier, weather. And of course, with the weather, we get the people who have those 4-wheel drives and think they can go anywhere and everywhere, but they forget 4-wheel drive doesn't stop a vehicle, it drives the vehicle. Local events, sporting events, if anyone's around major cities where there's hockey, baseball, football, any of those college towns, you're going to get more traffic when the big game's in town. Some of the things I look at, if anyone's ever been to State College, Pennsylvania, for Penn State there, they get a large crowd, 110 to 115,000 people for one game, and it can take 4 to 6 hours to get out of that area because of the traffic, and you add an accident, it's longer. And of course, the day of the week. Most of the accidents are going to happen Monday through Friday during those morning and evening rush hours, but the holidays is a big factor also. People go out, New Year's Eve, go out and they start drinking, and then I've only had 2 or 3 and I can get behind that wheel. So you need to pay attention when you're there as to the day of the week and everything going on. So one of the things that happens, and one of the questions I used to get all the time was, can I move the vehicle or do I have to wait for the police to show up? 95% of the time you can move the vehicle. We encourage you to move and get out of the way, especially if you're on a highway. You don't want to be staying in those lanes. And if you're just over the crest of the hill and you stay in the lane, you're going to probably be in more accidents or cause more accidents. So most states have the initiative for the motorists to move the vehicles out of the lane and get over to a safe area. And we always try to stress the safe area. You may have to go a quarter mile to a mile down the road sometimes. Some of these shoulders may be 1 foot, 2 foot wide. Some of the shoulders may be 8 foot wide, but we want the people to get to the safe area. As a law enforcement, I can tell you, I don't need to see the final resting place in 90% of the accidents. I can go back, I can look at the skid marks, I can identify most of the thing from the gouge marks and grooves and everything left on the roadway there. Managing the incident becomes easier when there's more lanes available to the traffic. So steer it, clear it, and let's get them out and help the flow of traffic get going nicely. So as you start getting there, we want you to do what's called a windshield review of the accident. Before you even get out of the vehicle, start summarizing, look at the area, perform a quick size up, clearly communicate where you are. I know one of my first times I got to an accident, I stuttered on the radio, I was nervous, everything. Look for your landmarks. Know where you are. I can't tell you how many times people have said, well, you know, I'm on the highway. I'm exit 81. I'm on Interstate 81 by exit 10. And you find them by exit 7 or whatever where they may be. Try to get landmarks. Get your cross streets, get your roads, clearly communicate. Start establishing your incident command and get that going right away. Set up a temporary block vehicle. Don't be afraid, you know, to set it up, but make sure you set it up in a safe location. If you're on the downside of a crest of a hill, you don't want to set up where cars are coming over the top of the hill at 70 miles an hour and they have to slam on their brakes. Back up. You know, if you have to back up 100 feet, 200 feet, do it. Ensure all the responders are wearing their high visibility PPE. The law enforcement, speaking, sometimes I could get it on, many times I couldn't get it on. You know, depending on how long I was going to be there, how long, what the night was like and everything. But for the firemen, I always suggest putting it on. Get it on there. You know, the law enforcement's going to follow their policies, procedures, the same with the fire, but we need to work together. The more high visibility equipment you're wearing, the better your chances are on the road. Get your assigned personnel to establish a TIMA. And we're going to get into the acronyms here in a few minutes. Communicate, size up the situation, get on the radio, talk to people, let people know, get everyone what's going on. Communicate your plan to the other responders. Let them know what's going on also. Let people know they're coming into the scene which way. Sometimes, you know, I've had accidents where I had to come down the highway the wrong way. You don't want them flying, but let them know where it is. Or if you can get them there safely, find a different way. Find a safer route. Sometimes taking the main road isn't the best route. A side street might work better. So make sure you communicate with everyone. We got to work together.
You know, and we have a, you know, a wide range of types of responses, from the career services that have a 24/7 coverage in a station, and they're bringing their company, you know, showing up as companies, all the way to the volunteer organizations, which some go to straight to the firehouse for the call, some go straight to the scene for the call, especially in combination departments and situations. You raise a really good point that communicating where we need people to stage, or where we need people to arrive from, what direction to arrive at the scene, is really an important factor. And hopefully that's part of the quick windshield size up. And then as you further develop your plan, you can grow it from there and get the people in the right places, rather than having lots of people and lots of cars. You know, bottom line here is we want to minimize exposure and danger to our responders. And one way to do that, like I'd mentioned, the organizations that have people come to the scene in their personal vehicles, you need to identify maybe a staging area. A lot of departments have a policy where before getting up on that divided highway, they have a rally point, so to speak, where they stand by, and if additional personnel needs to be up there, they find a safe way to get them up there, rather than having the highway covered with personal vehicles. So,
yeah, adding 5 or 10 more vehicles as first responders, though, that can cause more congestion and more headaches for you also. And the chances of a secondary accident increase with all the vehicles.
Absolutely, Charlie.
So we're going to size up, you know, get the exact location of the incident. We want to try to get the number and type of vehicles involved, the obvious signs of injury, the occupants. You know, if everyone's up and walking around, that's a good sign. Make sure we check them out. Sometimes they're not up, but check them. You know, we want to make sure that we're sizing up everything going on. Next, we need to establish, do we have to close lanes? If so, how many lanes are we going to have to close? What type of hazards are out there? What are we facing as we get to those locations? You know, it can be very quick, and you should have a good idea when you're pulling up on the scene, if you're going to need to close lanes, or if it's something that you're going to be able to get off the road quickly. The other thing you need to look for is hazards or other problems. You know, are there wires down? Is the tractor trailer carrying a hazmat placard on the outside? Do you have a public transit bus that has 20 people on it? You know, what type of other issues might you need? What might be going on? Make sure you establish a command and get the ICS started right away. So the move it or work it, we talked about this a little bit earlier. If a vehicle's in condition, the road conditions allow, let's get them off the road as quickly as we can. The ideal place to get them is right off the, if you're on a limited access highway, get them right off an exit and somewhere safe, a park and ride, a gas station, whatever you can. But let's be realistic too. That doesn't happen very often. So if we can get them onto the shoulder, that's fine. Now, like I said earlier, a lot of times the shoulders are very narrow or very wide. One of the big hazards I used to face, especially around the Hartford area, is the left lanes. There was no shoulder. So what I would do is escort them over into the right lanes, get them over on that right shoulder where we had an 8 to 10 foot clearing. It took time, but we got them over there sometimes. Make sure that you get the lanes clear. And, you know, the biggest thing was your safety. The responder safety is the number one priority, because if you get injured or hurt, we do no good. We just cause more issues and it causes more loss. And honestly, we can't afford to lose any of the responders. I don't care what uniform they're in, volunteer, full-time, law enforcement, ambulance, no one needs to get hurt out there. So your safety always comes first. So please make sure you check and be careful. Don't assume because you're in a uniform, people are going to stop and you can cross the lanes. Stay careful, stay in protected areas. Don't go wandering outside the protected areas looking to try to do more, because that's probably going, the worst will happen.
Yeah, Charlie, the move it or work it used to be one of my favorite tools as a fire captain, especially in areas where vehicles weren't traveling that fast, where 30, 40, 45 mile an hour areas where the damage to the vehicle was insignificant enough that it really could still roll without too much difficulty. And after we'd respond, we'd set up our temporary traffic control area or our incident management area and make sure the people are okay, the hazards are okay, there's no more problems. And then we turn to law enforcement and say, this looks like it's in condition. We can push it to the shoulder or into that parking area. What do you think? And law enforcement, our colleagues would be like, absolutely, let's get out of the road. This is dumb, just hanging out, waiting for a tow truck. So very often we would go ahead and move it ourselves, even if it couldn't be moved under its own power, as long as it was safe, as long as, do a risk assessment of whether or not it was a safe thing to do. But if it was safe, we went ahead and got it out of the road. And then everybody could go home except law enforcement who's waiting for the tow truck or, especially when there were no fluids or, we didn't need to help out the towing company with the cleanup afterwards. It worked out very well. So don't be afraid to do the move it or work it decision early on. I think it's a great way to make everybody safer sooner.
Absolutely. And the only time the move it or work it won't work is a serious injury or a fatal accident. That's a whole nother ball of worms here that, you're going to be there for hours and something like that usually. But, for minor accidents and things, yes, the move it and work it is the way to go. So if you initially have to close or block, do as many lanes as you think you will need to work safely. Remember, you can progressively open the lanes as you go. One of the things you need to remember too is if you do need to close lanes, give yourself that workspace. It's easier to give back the lanes than it is to take the lanes if you need them back again. So if you have an accident and you think you need 2 lanes on a 3-lane highway, take the 2 lanes, and then you can always give 1 lane back at a time until you get everything going. But make sure that you give yourself the workspace you need for this incident. So let's talk a little bit, what type of blocking are we going to do? There's all types of blocking actions. Many people don't know the different lingo, so we're going to give it to you a little bit here. Linear block occurs when a responder positions their vehicle to block a single lane or the shoulder. Now, the one thing I always want to remind you when you do a linear block is to make sure you angle your tires, your steer tires, because if your vehicle gets hit and you got those tires straight, that vehicle's going forward into your incident. So one thing I always was taught was get your tail of the vehicle sticking out a little and your front of the vehicle with the wheels turned towards the guardrail, because if it gets hit, it's going to go into the guardrail, not into that other vehicle, not into you. Angled block, you're going to be taking your vehicle and positioning it at an angle to block the lane or traffic. So you'll be blocking, you may be blocking one or two lanes depending. Multi-lane block, you're going to be blocking multiple lanes with the vehicles. You're going to be taking that vehicle, turning it sideways as much as you can to block the area and give yourself the workroom you need and everything. The one thing I want to remind you though, whenever you're doing these blocks, don't just jump out of the vehicle, look around before you get out, and make sure it's safe for you to exit your vehicle before you leave. You do not need to be, I can't stress this enough, I've seen it happen, you don't need to be getting hurt at the scene. So please always check your mirrors, check everything, exit safely. So we got some photos here of the angled block for you. As you can see, the vehicles are blocking multiple lanes. We want you to show you how that tail blocks in that bottom right picture. If that truck gets hit, it's going to go straight into the ditch and off the road. The top photo, the one thing I suggest with that top photo the photo on the left here, when you're getting to the scene in an engine, where's most of the crews exiting from? Are you going to have 3-4 people exiting the passenger side or the driver's side? Use the vehicle so the least exposure to the crew happens. If you need to block it so that's like that because you've got one person exiting the passenger and 2 people exiting on the driver's side, that's great. But remember your crew and make sure you move the vehicle so that you're blocking in the least amount of people are exiting into the lane of traffic.
One other point that goes right along with that, Charlie, is it depends on the type of incident as well. We see engine 4 there in the lower right-hand side. They're kind of in what a lot of us instinctively would say is the wrong angle. A lot of us like to angle the truck or the engine or using our blocking vehicle in such a way as to guide the eye and encourage the motorist to move in the direction that the vehicle is angled. But you may want to consider having engine 4 do that if you are going to be stretching a line and your pump operator's got to be out there on that side. They're much better protected than they would be, say, as in the picture above it, where operating at the pump panel that puts them right out by passing traffic. And I'm here to tell you from personal experience, operating on a car fire while vehicles were brushing my tail trying to run the pump, they aren't going to slow down. They think they have some place to be, even if there's smoke blowing across the lanes. So don't take it for granted and consider the best positioning to protect your crew, as Charlie mentioned. Also, again, it does help the motorist and guides their eye if you are in a position where you are able to have it angled like the picture on the left.
So this is a great picture. This is an angle linear block. And the nice thing is we're starting to see more and more of these safety service patrols out. Up in the Syracuse area, I know that DOT runs it and it's paid for by Allstate Insurance and everything. And it's great. They have a signboard which gives you that nice, move left, move right. They're protecting the person up with the disabled vehicle. They assist. They'll do different things, gas or change a tire or something. And they do the move it very often. A lot of these vehicles have the capability to push a disabled vehicle out of the lane of traffic and over to get into a safe spot. So these is a great little service, these safety service patrols. But the big thing we're pushing here is we want you to see how the front tires are turned. The vehicle is there to protect the broken down stranded vehicle. So that linear blocking is easy. It's there to help the people, and it gives you a great service area. And notice how he's not right up on the bumper of that car. He's 3-4 car lengths behind, and you need that distance, because if something happens to that vehicle, it gives them reaction time to get out of the way, and it's going to give them also the opportunity to get out. Hopefully that vehicle doesn't get pushed into the other vehicle. But then again, at 60, 70 miles an hour, closing that 3 to 4 car length distance could be very easily done, even with the parked vehicle being pushed. So the lane plus one blocking, we're giving ourselves a work area. You know, as you can see, they're extraditing a person out of the vehicle here. It gives you an area where you can treat the people. It gives all first responders a safe area, but don't trust that area. Once again, remember what we talked about with the distracted driving or the dumb drivers here. You know, make sure that you have someone watching traffic. Usually when it's a situation like this, the law enforcement will watch the traffic while the first responders treat the person. And then we'll gather our information afterwards. But, you know, you want to have that lane so that you can move the people and take care, move equipment, move yourself, and you can move around the vehicle in a safe manner. If you were to just to have that angled linear blocking going on, someone could easily step backwards and get hit by a vehicle. Once again, Lee mentioned it. These people don't slow down for accident scenes. Should they? Yes, absolutely. But do they? No. They have somewhere to go, and they're in a rush to get there. So don't be afraid to take that lane plus one if you need to do the work on the vehicles, the victims, and take care of that lane. Give yourself a workspace. So the critical wheel angle, you know, I can't stress this enough. You know, you're looking at this engine 6 here, and people are thinking, oh, there's no way that can get moved. Well, you get an 80,000-pound tractor trailer coming down the road, lose control. They will push that vehicle very far and very quickly, especially doing 55 to 65 miles an hour. So make sure you have those tires turned to protect the scene, which is protecting yourself. Do not leave those vehicle tires straight. You know, make sure you get those tires turned at an angle that's going to give you the incident space that you need, and it's going to protect you and protect the scene for yourself for going on here.
Yeah, and one other point, actually, I'm curious what you think, and we'll see if you and I agree, Charlie. But when you're using a vehicle as a barrier or a barricade, which essentially is what, you know, that's what a blocking vehicle is. Would you recommend that everybody on board that vehicle step out of the vehicle and not be just sitting in it?
You know, Lee, I'm sorry. Yeah, I suggest getting people out of the vehicle. You know, it's my opinion is that you get out of that vehicle, you get up to the scene, and you're going to have that reaction time. You know, I've watched the videos of the tractor trailers hitting a fire truck. Then there was one just recently back in December where a Texas DPS trooper was killed and a volunteer fireman was injured, but the fire truck was demolished. If anyone was in it, it probably would have been a double fatality, if not more.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's when you go around talking, it's sometimes, you know, some topics are a little controversial. You obviously have to have discipline within your crew to ensure that they are in these safe areas and engaged as the incident requires. But you hit the nail on the head. I think that when a vehicle is being used as a barricade, it's probably a bad idea to put a person inside of that barricade, because there is a little bit of an anticipation that we're hoping we don't need it, but if it gets hit, it's going to get hit. And it's very possible, weird pattern I've noticed, and this is anecdotal only. I haven't been able to see a lot of research on it yet, but it seems that the frequency of tractor trailers involved in these struck by incidents is disproportionately higher than the other motorists on the road. And hopefully somebody somewhere with a little more time and maybe a few more brain cells than I have is doing some research on that, as to maybe getting to the bottom of exactly why it seems to be happening that way. But yeah, I agree. Get everybody out of that vehicle. You want it to protect the scene, which means that the worst case scenario is that thing's going to get hit. You don't want people inside a vehicle that's going to get struck.
Right. And Lee, one thing I think, if your department requires you to stay with the vehicle, if that's the policy and you don't want to, make sure you stay in the vehicle and you're seat belted. Don't take that seat belt off. If you're required to stay in that vehicle and you're not to be at the scene, keep that seat belt on if you have to stay in the vehicle. I know there was times I was assigned, to sit way back from accident scenes. I'd be, 400, 500, 600 yards back, and I don't know how many near misses I had. So our policy was, if you had to stay in there, keep your seatbelt on, and I think that's what you need to do if you do need to stay in the vehicle. You need to be ready to get in for that injury if it were to happen, and the best protection you're going to have is a seatbelt and as a blocker.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the other thing. One last note about that. We could probably spend a long time just talking about this one particular subject, but like I said, it's a little controversial. There's probably no 100% right way or wrong way in this case, but very often as well, you don't see the rear of this angled blocking vehicle struck. It's that nose that's out closest to traffic, and
right.
That usually happens to be the passenger compartment. So another thing to consider, and when your agency is looking at policies, make sure that we're doing everything we can to minimize exposure of people to that risk of that potential collision.
Absolutely, Lee. Absolutely.
So I think I'm going to jump in from here, Charlie, and we'll start talking about this incident management area and some of the things as well on the highway. Here's kind of your typical, I used to call it the sacrificial hierarchy of traffic incidents. Fortunately, we're a lot smarter than that now. But generally speaking, we've got an upstream and a downstream to the incident being where the collision is. And this example here is your divided highway. You've got a couple of lanes, and the upstream from the incident, you've got your fire apparatus that is being used as a blocking vehicle, maybe even close enough that it can stretch lines and operate if there is a fire situation or a risky situation. And then further upstream, traditionally what we like to see, and what, there has been a fair amount of research done on this, and I'm going to be touching on some of it in the next few slides, but one of the things that we found is that people who are motoring down the highway, they tend to slow down or pay attention more when they see a police car and react sooner. So we like to have that police car way up there, sort of as our advance warning or our early warning. And again, this is during our initial moments of the incident before we can set up and establish our management area. Downstream, of course, we want to get the ambulance on the other side of the accident because it's the first one that's probably going to leave. It's most likely the first one that's going to leave. And then any other vehicles that don't necessarily have to be actively engaged, but we will be using, such as that flatbed tow truck that we have in the picture there, is also going to be downstream of the incident. That way, at least in the initial moments before we get the incident management area set up, we've got everything basically protected by our law enforcement early warning and our fire apparatus acting as a temporary blocking vehicle. So one of the big changes to try to make us safer, the NFPA, as I said, a lot of research, a lot of things we've looked at. A lot of agencies actually were leaning further forward than when the NFPA guideline came out. But starting in 2009 with 1901, And with the 1917 being created for the standard for ambulances in 2013, both of them now require the chevrons like you see on the backs of those vehicles, and it's 6 inches, and it's specific, 6 inches wide chevrons, specifically those colors, sort of a high vis yellow alternating with a reflective red. And it's specific, the guideline talks about that the red has to be, or all of that material has to be reflective, and reflective in a way that it's recognized the same color at night with light shining on it as during the day. And a lot of information says that that catches the motorist's eye sooner, and it's got the move over markings, which can help give the motorist the idea that maybe they need to do exactly that. So, and the guidelines do say that at least 50% of the rear of the vehicle must have this this chevron pattern. I could spend many hours talking about emergency vehicle and scene lighting. It became one of my sort of focuses or pet peeves, if you will. It's something that I don't think we do very effectively, and so much so that I know a lot of areas and a lot of statewide agencies and disciplines and departments and are all looking at smarter ways to do their emergency lights. Used to be we just had that slow roller, maybe a halogen light. The federal light bar was something that existed when I started doing this, and that was all well and good, but we were having a lot of terrible incidents, and so a lot of research was done, and what we found was having rear-facing amber lights blinking at about a rate 60 to 80 times a minute is what it takes to get people's attention, and cognitively they see the amber, they think hazard, they think caution, and they start slowing down and wondering what's going on up there. This picture, I think, is a great example of what sometimes our vehicles are designed to do, and it results in almost a blinding effect to the motorist, especially when these lights sometimes are flashing at 100 or 120 times a minute. It becomes almost a negative effect to creating a safe situation or a safe circumstance. So spend some time studying. I know a lot of state police departments in New England have looked at it, and they've got different patterns and different speeds of their patterns, depending on front-facing, rear-facing, whether it's day or night, depending on whether they're in drive or park. And our systems are now smart enough that they can change. It's depending on the ambient daylight, and also what gear, whether you've got it in park or you've got it in drive or whatever gear you're in. So it's real important that we minimize while we warn our oncoming motorists, we don't confuse them and we don't blind them. The LEDs that come along have really been a fantastic thing from a standpoint of easier to maintain, takes less power to operate on the vehicles, but unfortunately they have a tendency to be extremely bright. And you'll remember, some of you perhaps, that we used to have a lot of strobes on our vehicles, and we went away from that long before the LEDs came along, because we found that the strobes were ineffective and were causing problems with motorists being able to gauge distance and as they approach. So having intelligent flashing patterns on the scene is really important. The other important thing is making sure that you don't have any rear-facing white lights. Be careful with your scene lighting. Yes, you need to be able to see the scene to operate, absolutely, but be careful where those lights are aiming. If they're hitting the oncoming motorist coming from upstream right in the eyes, they're not going to be able to see you as easily operating in and around the scene. And the same thing with if you're on a say a state highway or a city street, you want to make sure that those headlights and those forward-facing white lights are also not shining in such a way as to blind those oncoming motorists. So lighting is a huge, again, another topic that could take quite a amount of time to discuss. The vests. Should be by now, and the story, in case you're wondering, the Federal Highway Administration said we had to wear them or they were going to take away our highway money. That's why we're wearing them. A lot of fire departments around the country were smart enough to recognize that the vests are actually making us safer and making things better for us. Automatic that your people should be putting on vests. Firefighters, there's an exclusion for when you are operating in firematic situation. When you are doing fireman things with fire and there's a heat concern, that's when you don't have to have your vest on. Your structural turnout gear will be adequate, but it really isn't adequate. There was a lot of discussion about, well, it's got a lot of reflective tape on it, so it should be okay. No, compared to a vest, it is much more difficult to be seen by an oncoming motorist. Charlie mentioned law enforcement. You know, they also have their operational safety concerns, and being able to pop them on and off as well. It can be challenging depending on the duration of the incident. They don't want to be doing a felony stop wearing what our gentleman there in the NC 207 vest is wearing. With the possibility of the person having a weapon. Do you agree, Charlie, that may be a negative outcome?
Oh, yes, I absolutely agree. And one of the other things to think about from the law enforcement standpoint, too, is a lot of these people are wearing the tactical external vest now, not the underneath the shirt vest. And with all the equipment, to get that safety vest on is difficult. I know at times when I used to have to put my safety vest on, it was hard to put it on with my bulletproof vest on. So, you know, that is a challenge. And depending on the situation, you know, if we were going to be out there, if I was doing a construction highway project or if I was out there for an extended accident, yes, we wore the safety vest. But, you know, a lot of times we did not wear the safety vest for minor motor vehicle accidents or, you know, minor time because it just, you know, you didn't know what that was going to turn into, though. I'll be honest, too. In this day and age, anything can turn into anything very quickly. And one of the things they have to think about is the officer safety. So the vest does come off at different times and come on when they're out directing traffic in extended periods of time.
Our friend John actually shared a thought that I know is very common practice. You know, these vests, these anti vests are designed to be tearaway. They're all Velcro. They're held together with Velcro. Right. If you're going on an alarm that is, or especially if you're at a station that does a lot of highway, does a lot of car crashes, it may be in your best interest just to put the vest on your turnout coat. And when you arrive at the scene and recognize that, well, this may be something I got to play fireman for and do firematics type stuff, you just pull the vest off and then you're good to go, ready, set. If you leave it on your coat and you arrive at the car crash and okay, it's a car crash, then you don't have to worry about donning a vest or things like that. It's already in place. Another question John had that I'm going to back up for just a second on is, and actually a couple of questions. You guys are doing it. You're going to catch me talking about like all night if you're not careful. So Charlie, you're going to be the referee on this one.
All right.
But one question from John is highlights or lower located lights. It depends. You know, the problem is the lights are there for a purpose, right? When we're responding in emergency mode, actively on our way, the idea of the lights is to get people's attention, to request that they grant us the right of way. And when we get on the scene, again, it's more about setting up that safe lane. So whether they're high lights that are positionally high or low, it depends really on your situation, and the size of your apparatus, your vehicle also is a big kicker. So I don't know if I can really give you a definitive one way or another answer on that. Just when you're designing your trucks or your apparatus, think about those lights. And I can tell you, especially the ones real low lights on the rear of a vehicle, they're not seen very far. And that also is kind of makes that's where it's more directly in the path of vision of the motorist. So they may not be able to see as well. So I would encourage you to do more research rather than take my word for it one way or another. I'm not going to commit to that. One other question is, do we leave all of our lights on? I'm a firm believer that you minimize your emergency lighting so as to safely identify the scene, safely warn motorists that you're there operating. but not, again, the blinding, overwhelming. And many, many years ago, I can remember my mother saying to me, you know, there's too many lights. We were passing a car crash, and she says to me, there's too many lights. All they do is confuse me. And, you know, that happens to a lot of motorists. And as soon as they're confused, that means they're not 100% planning where they're going, knowing when they're going to stop, or ready to make an evasive maneuver if something unusual occurs. So I would highly recommend, and there's a lot of research that follows up, that the minimization, the best lights to have are the rear-facing halogen flashers, the arrow sticks. Believe it or not, the color of the light's important. The reason you see a lot of blue lights on the rear of fire trucks now is because scientifically that's the first color your eye sees. So do your research and look at it when you're writing your policy and when you're building your apparatus, because I think we can do a lot better job.
Lee, just to throw something in about the highlights and lowlights here. Something to think about is how the vehicle is going to be angled at the scene too. You know, if you turn that vehicle and you have your lights facing off the road completely, what you have on the side of the vehicle is protecting it too. So you need to think about that area also, and you know, look at that type of situation and go from there.
Absolutely. Getting back to vests, one other question: should they all be rip away? That's actually part of the ANSI standard. They should be tear away. And so hopefully you've got that equipment available, or your agency is able to work on getting that equipment available. The idea being that it's tear away also for the hopefully highly unlikely event, but there have been, especially with construction workers, there have been events where the vehicle has passed so close to them that it has actually caught their vest on a mirror or a part of the vehicle, and it has resulted in serious injuries. So if it's able to be pulled away or torn away, then it's less likely to have that kind of an outcome.
Yep. I'll give you something on the law enforcement side. You'll notice a lot of times when police officers in other states do traffic stops on the highways, they do not wear the hats outside the vehicle, because tractor trailers and cars like to do what they call dusting and get in there close and blow the hat off the person. They think it's funny. And there's been a number of police officers that have been injured that way. So, you know, it's important that you have that tearaway vest for that reason.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So moving on here, let's talk about this TEMA, this traffic incident management area that we're going to set up. And we've already touched on, you know, upfront major considerations, things to think about is, one, how long is this thing going to happen? It could be anything from what we consider a minor or a low-grade incident, fender bender, disabled vehicle still on the road, all the way up to if it's something where it's multiple vehicles, possibly multiple injuries, you're going to be out there for a while. And then it's 30 minutes to as long as 2 hours if you've got hazardous materials or a small spill. And then to the large scale incident, we have a fatality. We have a lot of product on the road that needs to be cleaned up. We have several large vehicles that are going to take time to remove. That's when we consider that a major incident, and we should be thinking about expanding and making sure that we have a very strong or very significant effort in establishing this management area. And those are times when we may want to start thinking about, if this is a large incident, then maybe detours is going to be the option. If it's a very minor incident, move it or work it. Sometimes there's been a lot of examples where you get something the size of a tractor trailer flops over, say, not really negotiating an on-ramp or an off-ramp well, winds up blocking a few lanes of traffic. And in an area where there is such traffic congestion all the time, Atlanta, Houston, DC, for example, and getting a couple heavy wreckers in there just to drag the truck out of the roadway and then being able to manage it from there was enough to safely get more traffic flowing. And remember, the reason that it's a priority for us to try to keep traffic flowing safely is that high number of secondary incidents and tertiary incidents, or one of the most common causes of a motor vehicle crash is another motor vehicle crash. And so if we can manage the traffic flow and try to get the incident's impact on the traffic flow taken care of as early as we can while we're safe to operate up there, then it's a win-win, and we may not have to deal with that secondary or tertiary crash. So here's a picture of a traffic incident management area, and here's the anatomy of one, if you will. It starts with probably one of the most underserved and so severely important aspects of it. This is something I think most fire departments absolutely have to, not need to, have to do better, because it's that early warning for a motorist. It's your first chance to get their attention that what's going on up ahead. And then we have what we call the transition area, which is the area where we're going to be taking possession of the lanes that we need to take possession of. And we do it using a taper, usually of cones or possibly flares. And we're trying to negotiate and encourage the motorists to recognize that they need to move over. Then we have the activity area, and in the activity area we have the buffer, which is basically the distance from the transition, including the blocking vehicle, all the way up to the incident itself. And then at the end of that, we have what we call the termination area. It's where we go ahead and let motorists know it's okay, you can start using this lane again, you're past the incident.
If I can, Lee, throw in, oops.
Yep.
Yeah, if I can just throw in there real quick, the advanced warning area, that is a high priority in my book. That's something that you really should focus on and get that information out to the public as soon as you can, whether it's a sign saying emergency scene ahead or having a vehicle up, a quarter mile up the road or something. But the more notice you can get out there, the safer you're going to make it at the scene for everyone.
Absolutely. That's where you're going to do yourself a lot of favors by setting one up. And again, high priority for protecting your sponsors. Enough said. Thank you. You took it away from me, Charlie, but it can't be emphasized enough. What we do is we want to make sure that it is far enough upstream from the incident that motorist can prepare for the lane change and prepare for whatever traffic controls we need to implement to make that scene safe. And also, one way we can get their attention is, and we'll show you some of the signs as examples, but also maybe a little shoulder taper, some cones. Again, most motorists, when they see cones sitting on the shoulder or near the roadway, they notice them, sometimes not consciously recognizing them, but when you've got a taper on the shoulder to a sign that says, warning, crash ahead, or something to that effect, you're doing yourself a favor, because now they're anticipating, I better pay attention. And they're kind of waking up, maybe even doing us the favor of putting their phone down.
Lee, a question just came in. I think it's a good point for right now. Is they're asking us to discuss the pros and cons of flares, cones, signs, warning lights. Is one better than the other?
And again, the recommendation is especially when we're talking about the taper or the transition zone, but we'll start with the warning area. It's really advantageous to have signs to get these. I'm going to throw the next slide up since we're talking about them. Get these pink signs up that are reflective. They're very clear what needs to be, what the driver should anticipate. That's your first best thing to do. Next best thing to do, they recommend you can either use flares or cones. The little lights you put on the road there isn't a lot of research yet, although the solid illuminating lights, I think, are about the same as a flare, or a motorist would react to them as the same as a flare. I would stick with those. There's advantages and disadvantages, of course. The advantages of flares is you can carry a ton of them. The little lights, the same thing. You can carry a lot of them as well. I would stay away from the ones that flash and blink and do all kinds of things. They may be the next great thing, but I've recently done a lot of research on this, and I haven't seen a lot to support that they're absolutely a great thing or a bad thing.
The one thing I'll throw out with flares, though, too, is you have to watch the season. I've seen brush fires start from people using the flares because they're kicking the side of the road when they're done, and
Yeah.
an hour later, I'm there for a brush fire with the fire department.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that about the flares as opposed to cones, which, cones are bulky. They take up a lot of space. But as you can see in that picture, man, they leave no guessing as to what we want the motorist to do. And they also are always relatively cool to the touch. And you never have to put one out or figure out how to put one out when the incident's over. And so yeah, you're not playing with fire or phosphorus when you're using cones as you sort of are when you're using flares. And that's definitely the downside of the use of flares. Is I also think, again, the cones, especially those tall cones that are actually within the highway guidance guidelines, they create the perception of a barrier, whereas flares just lying in the road, it's a little bit less of that perception. So our advanced warning area, we want it to be at least 100 to 300 feet upstream. We would make accommodations for things that Charlie's already mentioned, a bend in the road or a rise or a hill or something like that, where basically your forward vision might be obstructed. That's when you need to move your warning area even further back so that you're getting that motorist's attention as you're headed down the road. Ideally, you got the resources, or you have your local DOT or somebody else who's got the vehicle there with the arrow stick. That vehicle, I think, depending on where the incident is, ideally, I want that way back in front on the shoulder, the first vehicle on the shoulder before the transition zone where the taper takes that lane, just to let people know early on they're going to be moving over. Just taking a glance at the questions coming in. Some of them I'm going to address here in just a minute or a few minutes. So the transition or taper area, as I mentioned, there's lots of different methods out there to safely do this. There's basic rules of thumb is when you're putting cones in the road, stay away from doing things like turning away from traffic. Always try to face traffic. Try to put your taper in with your cones from upstream to downstream, so as to get the motorist moving over sooner. If you start trying to walk towards traffic coming towards you and putting cones in the road, it becomes a little bit more dangerous. This is one time where you absolutely want to have a spotter. You already want to have your advanced warning area signs up to warn them that people are operating. This is somebody that better have all their PPE on, including their vests and things like that. And again, being prepared for the motorist who's not paying attention. Then there's that buffer space. I talked about it briefly. That is the space that, worst case scenario, is gonna save your life. In the middle, in that buffer space, we're going to have a blocking vehicle adequate to the task. So again, when a tractor trailer comes barreling down, there aren't too many things adequate to the task, but smaller vehicles and things like that, a fire engine or a ladder truck weighs plenty and can be a mass that it's not going to be pretty when it's over, but if it's properly positioned and you've got adequate buffer on both sides, and the wheels are positioned correctly, then you're going to save some lives, and the claim is going to be the claim. So we'll help you out getting that truck replaced, but we don't want to worry about how many people were seriously injured by this event. So that's your buffer area. And again, it's kind of like that last clear picture for the motorist not paying attention that they need to get over now, otherwise it's going to be unpleasant. And that's one other factor we haven't mentioned, that there are a lot of serious injuries in these secondary accidents to the people who aren't paying attention, if you will, or lose control and do strike that buffer vehicle. So that's what we call the longitudinal buffer. Lateral buffer, by the way, is really important too. And here's a great comparison picture for you, the folks who are asking about the difference between flares and cones. Flares are okay. They kind of mark the road, but I don't, again, I think those cones gave a lot more better perception of a barrier. Here's an aerial truck that's being used as a blocking vehicle, but they're positioned in such a way as to create, those flares are positioned in such a way as to create a lateral buffer. This kind of goes along with Charlie's lane plus one concept, that we need to give people room to take evasive action without hitting somebody or something. And so that means give yourself a lot of room. If it means taking an extra lane or extra half a lane until it's safe to kind of give it back to the traffic, then so be it. The bottom line is making sure nobody gets hurt. This is really advantageous. A lot of times the lateral buffer tends to dry up or isn't available just when the tow truck operator is there, and they wind up taking some really, really ugly risks if somebody's not looking out for them.
So a great question just came in, Lee. I think it might be a good time to answer it too, is when do we pick up the cones, or when we pick up the cones, do we go from downstream to upstream?
Yeah, and stealing my thunder from the termination phase, but that's okay.
All right.
You want to travel upstream as you're picking up the cones. And the reason about that is because if you can picture in your mind picking up the cones going towards the downstream, if you will, or at the beginning of your transition, it's not quite obvious to the motorist where they go next. Do they go right? Do they go left? Some people, again, we have to assume they're not totally paying attention. They may go to the wrong side of those cones and wind up right in the middle of your incident. So if you start at the downstream, the distant end, and work your way back as you're picking up those cones, you're essentially giving them back the lane further and further upstream until you give the whole thing back. And by then, it should be free and clear. So that's an excellent question. And thanks for that. So there's the incident space. What we prefer to have is continue to run cones all the way past the incident. Just because you have a blocking vehicle there, you can't make this stuff up. We've seen it. It happens. Somebody will get around that fire truck and then try to pull back in that lane and not realize that, oh, geez, there's crashed cars laying in the middle of the road, or there's an ambulance sitting there. So run cones all the way along so the motorist knows you're essentially telling the motorist where they need to drive all the way past the scene, so as to keep them. If you go online anytime and you look for any of this stuff, it's true. This stuff happens. I don't understand either, but motorists have a funny way of doing things that you just don't expect. Yeah,
a lot of time people just get past that first vehicle and they want to just move right back over into that right lane. So this is also the time, you should have someone in that area of the incident watching traffic, if possible.
A great example when that can happen, Charlie, is the impatient driver behind the slow car, right? As soon as they get past that fire truck, they think, okay, I'm going to get around this guy. And they shoot in and whoops, I guess there is a crash accident. They got a crash in there. So great point. And then there's that termination area I mentioned that you're basically giving permission to go back into the lane that you've taken from them. And it's a visual cue. You don't necessarily need somebody to wave them over. As long as you give them the cones, most drivers will figure out what to do. Before I move on, we've spent a lot of time talking about, again, we're very divided highway, freeway centric here as we're giving you this presentation. But while I have this picture up, we can do very similar things on like I say, a normal 2-lane state highway, like US 1, for example. The difference would be that you would need some traffic controls at either end, and you want to have a much more substantial taper on the downstream side of the accident. And you also want an advanced warning area on both sides of the accident, not just on the upstream side for the lane of traffic. So northbound and southbound is on that same piece of asphalt, same piece of concrete. You're going to want to have, and when I say traffic controls, a lot of agencies find great deal of success with the old lollipop, slow, stop, and a substantial communication plan between the two people who are operating those lollipops on either side.
Yeah, and one of the things, Lee, from my past experience I've seen is when we're on a divided highway such as the 2-lane road, it works out well when fire police are on the scene helping out, and you got good communication, and you get two of the senior people that know how to control traffic doing it back and forth. One idea I saw one time they were doing is they would send so many cars through, and the fire policeman would stop his last car, hand that person a highway flare to give to the fire policeman at the other side of the accident. Hand that there, and not only did they have the radio communication, they had a physical passing of an object there to confirm that that was the last vehicle going through.
Yeah, very good. That's a great idea. So that's the termination area. This kind of goes to a question that we got. I strongly recommend that you establish a lookout person or a watch out. That person's sole goal is to keep an eye on oncoming traffic, to make sure that everyone appears to be paying attention, make sure everyone appears to be behaving as you would expect as they travel past your scene. If anything unusual or untoward or just, well, scary is about to happen, then they put out the call or warning or whatever it is. Have a keyword, have a plan that everyone understands, that when they hear on the radio or they hear somebody yell, watch out, or rock, like we do in climbing or when we're doing rope rescue, so everybody gets their heads up, they look and they prepare, or be ready to, or just start scrambling for safety in the event that things are about to go terribly bad. So yeah, one watch out is great. If you have the ability to have more than one, that's even better, so as to monitor the traffic. We don't want to ignore them and focus on our incident and become, that tunnel vision where the true dangers are not just the incident we're managing, but again, all of those motorists driving all of those really heavy objects towards your scene at sometimes blinding speed. So lastly, the termination, when we decide it's time to break down, we're going to, make sure we've got everything cleaned up. We're going to talk to everybody who's there and all the responders. Are you good for us to start taking up? Yeah, okay, great. Tow truck drivers, you guys good to go? A lot of times these guys will load their vehicle and then they'll pull over on their shoulder so they can finish up with the operators of the vehicle and law enforcement. As long as everybody is good to go for you to start terminating this incident management area, then go ahead and start doing it. And most importantly, incident command should be the one making the final decision that it's time to do that. Make sure all your people are where they belong, and also want to let the traffic control authority or your dispatch know when you have completed opening of the lanes. And like I said, you should take it down just like you set it up, from downstream, basically the opposite, downstream, and move it upstream. So the last thing really that is taken care of is you take down your advanced warning signs, and your apparatus leaves the scene, blocking vehicles and all that stuff. So that pretty much wraps up setting up. And again, this is actually a course that we've put together that can go on for, and it goes to much more depth and detail. And we have the opportunity when we're doing a live course, of course, to be able to answer these questions live. And hopefully we're doing a pretty good job here of answering your questions as well. One last point before we look at to see if there's any hanging fire questions is make sure that all of your policies in your agency training is up to date. Make sure the people who are out there doing it have been trained on how to set this up, have had more than an hour and a half webinar. Make sure that your vehicle operators are current in their EVOC. Make sure that, car crashes, usually there's some kind of fluid on the ground, or there's a high likelihood we're going to be dealing with some hazmat. So ensure everybody's training is up to date with that. And of course, make sure that they're very familiar with the incident command system. This is one of those situations that is every time is a multi-agency response. And as I mentioned at the top of this, it's imperative
Lee, I did see some questions come in, several of them talking about what you were just talking about, in the, what happens when we have a disagreement with law enforcement, or disagreement with another agency that's on the scene. And I think you hit on it, but I want to, expand on that a little bit. I think a great thing to do is have some meetings at least once every 6 months with all the responders that'll be working in that area. So get DOT together, get your, local law enforcement agencies together, fire department together, and come up with a plan as to, if we have to detour, what's that detour going to look like? If we have to move a vehicles or close a lane down, what's that look like? But those conversations are a lot better had in a, comfort of a meeting room somewhere than they are at 2 o'clock in the morning out on the scene. So anything that you can do to get those people together ahead of time and have those conversations will save you a lot of hassles on the scenes down the road.
Absolutely, Dave, and take advantage. These aren't the only scenes. Hopefully, you're able to foster, within your region, county, municipality, an organizational professionalism where you can collaborate and talk about how you're going to approach things like this. Because, each agency doesn't automatically want to pick a fight with you, or you don't want to automatically pick a fight with them. It's really more about different objectives and different perceptions of the problem, and being able to work out how we're all going to meet our objectives and resolve the problem as quickly and safely as we can. So again, Dave, hit the nail on the head. Have those collaborations now and as often as you can, so you can talk about this stuff. I see there's another question here pertaining to the PPE. One question on is there any particular one type of helmet that is safer or ideal for the people who are out there? A lot of our senior members are fire police, and they bless all the fire policemen out there. They are out there in the worst of it at all hours. Most fire departments, they're the longest ones out there in doing the most work just to make all of us safe. But as far as PPE, Dave, are you aware of any ideal headgear or anything out there that they're looking at?
I am not. And I got that question, and we got another one, if there's any expiration date on the vests themselves. And I'm not familiar with that either, but we'll look into both of those two areas and make sure we get some information out on that.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's somebody asked about I hear there's a law on the height of cones. Believe it or not, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD, is a federal document that basically, I don't know if you ever noticed, but you drive around the country and you see basically the same signs and the same stripes and the same traffic signals and the same traffic cones. Yeah, all of that is guided by that manual. That's considered the gold standard in the traffic industry. Dare I say, it's essentially the Bible in many ways as far as traffic and traffic control devices. So they're very clear exactly on, depending on the speed of the highway they're used, they have to be a minimum height, and the reflective tape on them, the number of stripes on the reflective tape and the width of the reflective tape as well. So yeah, that's absolutely a true statement.
I see another question that came in asking about recommendations for snow and ice conditions. Obviously, as the road conditions gets worse, doesn't matter whether it's snow, ice, rain, what it is, we really have to put some extra efforts into everything that we're doing to make sure that we are. And the Lee pointed it out well, and Charlie talked about it as well. You know, I think that advanced warning area is where we really falter in fire and EMS agencies today. You know, we pull a truck in as a blocker, and we've seen a number of those get hit across the country, and we're saving lives when the truck gets hit and doing property damage, but we could avoid so much more of that if we would just do a proper job with that advanced warning. You know, make sure you've got the signs, make sure you know, depending on the speed of the highway you're on, the higher the speed, the further you have to put that advanced warning back to let people know. But I've seen some agencies that put it too far back, and then there's nothing, and the car's driving down the road, and they say, oh, well, I don't see anything, so it must be somebody just left a sign out here. But, you know, get the sign out early, but then continue to put signage in and make sure that you're, you know, putting that advanced warning area, coning that off. It's a lot easier for somebody to hit a bunch of cones than it is for them to hit one of our apparatus. So give some extra time and thought to that. And when you get in those snow and ice conditions, you're going to have to push that back even a little further.
One last question here I think we have is, and I want to see what Charlie's thoughts are before I try to answer it. What are your thoughts on vests that light up?
You know, Lee, the light up vests, as long as they're not blinking, I think they're okay. I've seen them on the highway construction people at night, and they wear the helmets with the LED lights around their head. But I think if they're blinking, it's going to be more of a distraction and more of an issue. You know, call me traditional, but the old reflective vest, I think, work just as well.
Yeah, we are aligned, sir. I agree. Having a light on somebody is advantageous to identify somebody who's around, and they're okay. If they're blinking, it's hard to keep track of that person as they move around.
Right.
And lastly, the vest itself with all the reflexite on it is designed to show the shape of a human. It's hard to have enough lights on one of those vests to show the shape of that vest or that person. So it's okay to as a hey, look at me, or get their attention, but really I think the safety comes from the reflective material of that vest.
Yeah, I agree. And I see Peter just told me the lights on the helmets are called halos. So that's good to know. Thank you, Peter.
All right. So I think that's about, I don't think we have anything else hanging fire, so we're going to wrap this up. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming out, coming online, and training with us, giving us some things that now we got to go back and educate ourselves a little bit some more, and hopefully we gave you something that you found beneficial. And I guess the one thing, the takeaway that Dave and Charlie and I have tried to drive home is, if you don't remember anything else, set up that advanced warning area, get those signs up so that you can at least get the attention of those motorists before they get on top of your scene. So,
Hey, Lee, did you have one of those pocket guides with you?
Oh yeah, right here. As a matter of fact, if you, we've produced, let's see, how am I doing here? We've produced some pocket guides that have a lot of the information we presented, including a nice picture and how to set up a traffic incident management area, and also distances and some checklists on the back to help you make the decisions when you're on the incident scene. And they're available through us at Risk Management. All you need to do is send us an email asking us for some. We'd be happy to send them along. riskmanagement@mcneillandcompany.com. Also, while we're talking about emailing us, hopefully you're enjoying these webinars and this webinar series we put together. We're doing our very, very best to give you good, solid, important information, and give you an alternative as we can't and shouldn't be and better not be going to our firehouses or having our meetings and getting our training sessions. You know, social distancing is making the difference to save lives, and we have to, you know, we're the safety people. We have to be the ones who are not breaking the rules or not following what makes sense and what we know is going to keep this thing from spreading. So in the meantime, we're putting together as many of these webinars as we can. If you have suggestions or have a topic that you would like an hour and a half done, you'd like us to present for, tonight we have about 160 people here. Please reach out, let us know at riskmanagement@mcneillandcompany.com, and we'll look at what we can put together and present. And that way, worst case scenario, you're still getting some of your training done, even though we can't all do it in the same room. And then when we can finally all break free in the summer, we can get out there and get our hands on stuff and really have some fun.
Well, Lee and Charlie, I told you guys you had 90 minutes tonight, and you've nailed it right on the head. We are right at 90 minutes. So thanks for the presentation. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Keep in mind, we've got that COVID-19 webinar tomorrow night. That one's at 7:30. That's the only strange time we got is tomorrow night at 7:30. Next Monday, we'll be doing emergency response, and next Wednesday, we'll be doing intro to agricultural responses. So we hope you can join us. Jump over to ESIP.com, scroll down on the left side of the page. That's where you'll find all the information about the upcoming webinars. Lee and Charlie, any last thoughts?
No. Be
Nope.
safe and wash your hands.
That's it.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us, and thanks everybody else for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again. Have a great evening.
Have a good night.
Good night.